This podcast is sponsored in part by our friends at Fairwinds. Whether you're new to Kubernetes or have some experience under your belt and then definitely don't want to deal with Kubernetes, there are some things you should simply never, ever do in Kubernetes. I would say run it at all. They would argue with me, and that's okay, because we're going to argue about that. Kendall Miller, president of Fairwinds, was one of the first hires at the company and has spent the last 6 years making the dream of disrupting infrastructure a reality while keeping his finger on the pulse of changing demands in the market and valuable partnership opportunities. He joins senior site reliability engineer Stevie Caldwell, who supports a growing platform of microservices running on Kubernetes in AWS. I'm joining them as we all discuss what dev and ops teams should not do in Kubernetes if they want to get the most out of the leading container orchestrator by volume and complexity. We're going to speak anecdotally of some Kubernetes failures and how to avoid them, and they're going to verbally punch me in the face. Sign up now at fairwinds.com/never. That's fairwinds.com/never.
Hello, and welcome to the AWS Morning Brief. Your ears are not deceiving you. This is not Friday. It is Wednesday. I am Pete Cheslock, and I am here to talk about something that is important to me, and that is the story of Elastic throwing in the towel on open source and instead choosing the SSPL. So recently, Shai Bannon, the founder and CEO of Elastic NV, wrote a series of blog posts about the upcoming license change for Elasticsearch, moving from Apache 2 to the server-side public license, also known as the SSPL, created by MongoDB a few years ago. These posts were so opaque that Shai added another post clarifying what the new license change is all about. And it's a very clear, screw you, AWS. Let's break this down a little further. So AWS makes more money on Elasticsearch than Elastic does. In the first post, Elastic claims that the licensing change, quote, protects our continued investment in developing products that we distribute for free and in the open by restricting cloud service providers from offering Elasticsearch and Kibana as a service without contributing back. But what does contributing back even mean? It surely doesn't mean contributing code, as AWS has already done that, and they've done that repeatedly. And AWS is not the only company that is upset with this sudden shift. Logs.io, which has been offering hosted elk since 2014, predating AWS's Elasticsearch, also expressed their concerns with the license change in a few blog posts as well. Just 2 days later, Logs.io CEO stated that they are committing to working with AWS and many other companies on the fork of Elasticsearch. So I think what Shai really meant is someone else is making more money than us, and that makes us mad. And sure, it's easy to hate on Amazon. Some might say it's even fashionable to take a principled stand against that big, bad behemoth. AWS certainly takes a share of the blame here, since they should have never used the Elasticsearch trademark when offering their service in the first place. It brings endless confusion into the marketplace that is still pervasive today. There are posts on Reddit in the DevOps subreddit, people wondering what is the difference between AWS Elasticsearch and Elasticsearch in the AWS marketplace. So Elastic shouldn't have to defend its own trademark. In a perfect world, a company wouldn't be required to spend time and money fighting and defending their trademark. But we don't live in a perfect world. If you want to retain your trademarks, you need to enforce them. That's what's required. Adam Jacob, the founder of Chef, has pointed this out on Twitter in the past. Adam has said, today is a good day to remind you, if you want exclusive use of a trademark, say so, and make it clear from the beginning, especially if you're going to ship an open source product with that name attached. Let Elastic be a warning. And that's a great point. At a previous startup I had worked at, we had a name, the name of the business, was just barely close to a competitor's, and that competitor quickly sent notice to enforce their trademark. Rather than fight it, our founders just picked a new name and moved on. But that's the problem here. Elastic didn't have many complaints back in 2015 when Amazon Elasticsearch came out. And that's a problem for them now. Pamela Chestek, a trademark lawyer and an OSI board member, made this point well on Twitter when she said, "Wouldn't surprise me, every young company trying to gain market share thinks it's great if your trademark is on everyone's lips, and they encourage it, only realizing later the harm it is causing themselves." At the time AWS released Amazon Elasticsearch, Elastic had raised about $100 million in VC funding after only a few years of being in business. They were the hottest growing startup. Their brand was already popular with folks in the tech community, and Amazon undoubtedly introduced Elasticsearch to a much wider audience with their hosted offering. Why didn't Elastic stop them in their tracks and declare this an abusive use of the Elastic trademark? I don't for 1 second believe that Elastic was just this small company and we were unable to fight our trademark. Do you know how many lawyers you need to even raise $100 million? Spoiler alert, it's a lot, and they are not cheap. Consider instead, as many open source backed startups often do, that Elastic thought that any press is good press, and they could convert a bunch of those Amazon Elasticsearch users to paid Elastic customers. And I'm sure they did. So instead of fighting the trademark, what if they could capitalize on it and all that free marketing that AWS was going to provide? Except it didn't quite work out for Elastic that way. Only now, when the pressure is on to return value to their shareholders, do they suddenly cry foul that AWS is this big bad company that takes and never gives back. AWS is a bully, but Elastic changing its licensing is not going to stop that. Elastic is taking their ball and they're going home. My beef with this, and with Elastic, NV the company, is they're changing their license to a closed source license with the SSPL after taking advantage of all of the benefits that Apache 2 licensing afforded them and watching someone else be more successful at building a business around it than they did. Elastic received millions of dollars in free engineering effort, QA testing, load testing, thanks to some of the biggest companies using their software. They got a huge technical community and all the free marketing that goes along with it. Some of their greatest features, like Kibana and Logstash, were all built by the community and later incorporated into Elastic.
This episode is sponsored by ExtraHop. ExtraHop provides threat detection and response for the enterprise, not the starship. On-prem security doesn't translate well to cloud or multi-cloud environments, and that's not even counting IoT. ExtraHop automatically discovers everything inside the perimeter, including your cloud workloads and IoT devices, detects these threats up to 35% faster, and helps you act immediately. Ask for a free trial of detection and response for AWS today at extrahop.com/trial.
A decade ago, I worked at a company that was one of the earliest users of Elasticsearch. Shai Bannon personally consulted with us for about a year as we migrated petabytes of data into a very early version of Elasticsearch. At one point, we had at that company 4 of the top 5 contributors working with us. They were our full-time employees. And of course, they all later went on to work at Elastic. I remember being on a Skype call, which tells you how old this discussion was, with some of the engineers. And we were trying to work out why we were having split brain issues under high load. Those conversations ultimately led to the creation of dedicated masters. Our larger clusters took hours to restart and reallocate shards because recovery would often begin before all those nodes were running. The identification of that issue led to the recover after data nodes functionality. My employer was just one example of this sort of thing. Over the years, Elastic benefited from hundreds, if not thousands, of companies, accelerating their research and development. In the end, they thanked their community and benefactors for their decades of service by changing to a proprietary license which many companies will disallow contribution to and usage of. SSPL is not an open source license. I will say this up front. I am not an expert on open source licensing. Instead, I defer to people much smarter than me. Experts like VM Brassier, who explains the risks of the SSPL in a fantastic blog post. Simply put, the SSPL is not an open source license. As the OSI Board of Directors state in a statement they made, it's deception, plain and simple, to claim that the software has all the benefits and promises of open source when it does not. All those businesses that have invested in Elasticsearch by running it, testing it, reporting bugs, and in many cases contributing back code are now being held hostage and left with a choice. Do they update their clusters for the latest security fixes and potentially taint the rest of their code base or their service offering, or do they pay the ransom to keep their existing solution and thus become an Elastic customer? We've seen this story play out when companies accidentally or otherwise link GPL v3, another reciprocal license, into a software product. For years, the standard question a company would get pre-acquisition was this: do you run any GPL v3 code in your product? Legal teams had determined GPL v3 code is too risky to the business. And I've personally seen corporate acquisitions fail when GPL v3 code is too deeply embedded into a service offering. Expect to hear similar questions from your legal departments in the future regarding SSPL license code. It's going to happen. The worst part is the SSPL does not solve Elastic's problem. Changing the license will do nothing to stop Amazon from continuing to make money on Amazon Elasticsearch. Amazon saw the potential for a license change coming nearly 2 years ago when they released Open Distro for Elasticsearch, an Apache 2 licensed version. If anything, companies who are currently self-hosting Elasticsearch on EC2 are going to be more inclined to migrate their workloads to Amazon Elasticsearch just to continue receiving security updates. Many companies who were big contributors of Elasticsearch are going to have blunt conversations with their legal teams, and it's going to end up with less users of Elasticsearch and a smaller community of contributors. Look, we all make bad decisions in high school. As it turns out, Elastic made some poor decisions in their youth that they are paying for dearly today. Elastic could have easily beaten AWS. When Amazon Elasticsearch first came out, it was pretty terrible. It took many years to stabilize and improve for wide usage. Elastic could have enforced their trademark early on without any trouble. If they did, Elastic would have been the only place to get Elasticsearch. Get Elasticsearch from the creators of Elasticsearch. That marketing copy writes itself. But instead, they ceded the high ground and they let AWS and countless other companies release hosted Elasticsearch offerings. At the end of the day, I'm not mad at Elastic. I'm just disappointed to see a founder who has personally made more than $1 billion on the backs of open source contributors and the wide adoption that the Apache 2 licensing provided close the door on all the contributors that got him and his company to where they are today. I understand that as the person in charge of the business, Shai must take steps that protect Elastic's shareholders and grow the business. But open source is not a business model, and changing your software licensing is not a solution to an incoherent product strategy. Elastic, consider for a moment that maybe Amazon isn't killing your business. You just suck at it. All right, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please go to lastweekinaws.com/review. Give it a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. Whereas if you hated this podcast, go to lastweekinaws.com/review. Give it a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice and tell me how wrong I am about this whole license thing. Thank you.
This has been a Humble Pod production. Stay humble.